Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Chapter 18, The Perfection of Renunciation. 18.1. Arjuna Uvacha Sannyasasya Mahabaho Tattvam Ichami Veditam Tyagasya cha Risikesa Patakesi Nisudana.
Arjuna said, O mighty armed one, I wish to understand the purpose of renunciation, tyagya, and the renounced order of life, sannyasa. O killer of the Kasi demon, master of senses.
Jyoti Masterji?
Oops, sorry, I was on mute, sorry.
Yeah, we didn't hear you. Number 2.
18.2. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Kamyanam Karmanam Nyasam Sanyasam Kavayo Viduha Sarva Karma Phalatyagam Prahustyagam Vichaksanaha.
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the giving up of activities that are based on material desire is what great learned men call the renounced order of life, sannyasa, and giving up the results of all activities is what the wise call renunciation, tyagya.
18.3. Tyagyam dosavad iti eke karma prahurmanisinaha yajnadana tapa karma natyajyam iti chapare.
Some learned men declare that all kinds of fruitive activity should be giving up as faulty, yet other sages maintain that acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance should never be abandoned.
18.4. Nishchayam shanume tatra tyage bharata satama tyago hi pursa vyagraha trivida samprakirtitaha.
A best of Bharatas, now hear my judgment about renunciation. O tiger among men, renunciation is declared in the scriptures to be of three kinds.
18.5. Yajnadana tapa karma natyagyam karyam evatat yagnotanam tapaschaiva pavanani manisinam.
Acts of sacrifice, charity, and penance are not to be given up. They must be performed. Indeed, sacrifice, charity, and penance purify even the great souls.
18. Itani apitu karmani sangam tyavta phalani cha kartavyani me patha nishchitam matam uttamam.
All these activities should be performed without attachment or any expectation of result. They should be performed as a matter of duty, O son of Pritha. This is my final opinion.
18.7. Niyatasya tu sannyasah karmano no papadite mohatasya parityagas tamasa parikititaha.
Prescribed duty should never be renounced. If one gives up his prescribed duties because of illusion, such renunciation is said to be in the mode of ignorance.
18.8. Dukhamiti eva yat karma kaya klesa bhayat yajet sa kvarta rajasam tyagam naiva tyaga phalam labhet.
Anyone who gives up prescribed duties as troublesome or out of fear of bodily discomfort is said to have renounced in the mode of passion. Such action never leads to the elevation of renunciation.
18.9. Karyamiti eva yat karma niyatam kriyate juna sangam tyaktava phalam chaiva satyagaha satviko mataha.
O Arjuna, when one performs his prescribed duty only because it ought to be done and renounces all material associations and all attachment to the fruit, his renunciation is said to be in the mode of goodness.
18.10 Nadvaste cha akusalam karma kusalenanusajate tyagi sattva samavisto medavichina samsayaha.
The intelligent renouncer situated in the mode of goodness, neither hateful or of inauspiciousness work nor attached to auspicious work, has no doubt about work.
18.11 Nahi tena bharata sakyam tyaktum karmani astesataha yastu karma philatyagi satyagiti abhidhyate.
It is indeed impossible for an embodied being to give up all activities, but he who renounced the fruits of action is called one who has truly renounced.
18.12 Anistam istam misram cha trividam karmana phalam bhavati atyaginam pretya natu sanyasinam vachet.
For one who is renounced the threefold fruits of action, desirable, undesirable, and mixed attributes after death, but those who are in the renounced order of life have no such result to suffer or enjoy.
18.13 Panchaitani mahabaho karnani nibodhame sankhye kartante proktani sadhyaye sarvakarmanam.
O mighty Arjuna, according to the Vedanta, there are five causes for the accomplishment of all actions. Now learn of those from me.
18.14 Adhisthanam tatha karta karanam cha pradagvidam vividascha pratakchasta devam chaiva trapanchanam.
The place of action, the body, the performer, Christ centers, the many different kinds of endeavor and ultimate supersoul. These are the five factors.
18.15 Sariravan manobiryad karma prarabhate naraha nyayam va viparitam chva panchaite tasya hetava.
Sorry. What?
18.15
Sorry, Mataji. Whatever right or wrong action a man performs by body, mind, or speech is caused by these five factors.
18.16 Tatraivam sati kartaram atmanam kevalam tu yaha pasyat akrita buddhivat tvan nasa pasyati durmati.
Therefore, one who thinks himself the only doer, not considering the five factors, is certainly not very intelligent, cannot see things as they are.
18.17 Yasya naha krito bhavo buddhir yasya na lipite hadvapi na imam lokan nahanti na nibadyate.
One who is not motivated by false ego, whose intelligence is not entangled through, though he kills men in this world, does not kill, nor is he bound by his actions.
18.18 Nanabneyam parichnata trivida karma chodana karanam karma karteti trividaha karma sangraha.
Knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower are the three factors that motivate action. The senses, the work, and the door are the three constituents of action.
18.19 Nanam karma cha karta cha tridhaiva guna bhedataha prochate guna sankhyaane yadavak charnutani api.
According to the three different modes of material nature, there are three kinds of knowledge, action, and performer of action. Now hear of them for me.
18.20 Sarvabhutesu yenakam bhavam avyayam iksate avibhaktam vibhaktesu tajgnanam vidisatvikam.
That knowledge by which one undivided spiritual nature is seen in the all living entities, though they are divided into innumerable forms, you should understand to be in the mode of goodness.
18.21 Prathak vinatu yajnanam nana bhavan prathak vidan veti sarvesu bhutesu tajgnanam vidirajasam.
The knowledgeable by which one sees that in different body there is a different type of living entity, you should not understand to be in the mode of passion.
18.22 Yattu katsnavad ekasmin karye saktam ahaitukam atarvardhavad alpam cha tattamasam udhartham.
The knowledge by which one is attached to one kind of work as the all in all without knowledge of the truth, and which is very meager, is said to be in the mode of darkness.
18.23 Niyatam sangarahitam argavadvesata kartam afila prepsuna karma yattat satvikam uchyate.
The action which is regulated and which is performed without attachment, without love or hatred, and without desire for fruitive results, is said to be in the mode of goodness.
18.24 Yattu kamespina karma sahankarena va punaha kriyate bahulayasam tad rajasam udhartam.
But action performed with great effort by one seeking to gratify his desires and attached from a sense of false ego is called action in the mode of passion.
18.25 Anubadam ksayam himsam anapeksham cha paurusam mohad arabhyate karma yattattamasam uchyate.
The action performed in illusion in disregard of spiritual injunctions and without concern for future bondage or for violence or distress caused to others is said to be in the mode of ignorance.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Jyoti Mataji. Nicely recited. Thank you, Nitai Prabhu. Also nice English recitation. So, welcome everyone to today's session, our chat session. If you're joining us for the first time, warm welcome to you. My name is Vrindavan Chandra. I'm one of the facilitators, and today we'll be continue with our reading and discussion from chapter 18 entitled Perfection of Renunciation. And today we'll give some focus to text number 21. So let me share my screen. So we'll start off by saying the Mangala Charanam praise. You can also follow behind muted mics. Om Gyanaatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmalitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vashadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Vishatarini. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So today we will be reading text number 21. This text number 21, it forms part of a section which runs from text number 18 to text number 40. And in this section, the Lord is explaining how the modes of material nature, they control all activities and all living beings. And in particular, the verses we're reading at the moment, which spans text 20, 21, and 22, the Lord is explaining three types of knowledge. Knowledge in the mode of goodness, knowledge in the mode of passion, and knowledge in the mode of ignorance. Yesterday, Divyanam Prabhu read and explained text number 20, in which the Lord has explained what is knowledge in the mode of goodness. And we see a similar theme in text number 21, in the sense that knowledge is described in the context of understanding what is consciousness. So in yesterday's verse, the Lord has explained how those who have knowledge in the mode of goodness, how they perceive consciousness. And he says, the Lord has explained that knowledge by which one undivided spiritual nature is seen in all living entities. Though they are divided into innumerable forms, you should understand to be in the mode of goodness. How we see the same type of consciousness, undivided consciousness, undivided spiritual nature in all living entities. And Divyanam Prabhu gave some nice explanation yesterday. So today we shall see what is knowledge in the mode of passion. And certainly we don't want to be in this category. So let's read. Prithaktvena tu yajjanam jnanam nana bhavan prithak vidhan veti sarveshu bhuteshu tajjnanam vidi rajasam. Synonyms. Prithaktvena, because of division, two, but, yet, which, jnanam, knowledge, nana bhavan, multifarious situations, pritak vidhan, different, veti, knows, sarveshu, in all, in all, bhuteshu, living entities, tat, that, jnanam, knowledge, vidi, must be known, rajasam, in terms of passion. Translation by Srila Prabhupada ki jai. That knowledge by which one sees that in every different body, there is a different type of living entity, you should understand to be in the mode of passion. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The concept that the material body is the living entity, and that with the destruction of the body, the consciousness is also destroyed, is called knowledge in the mode of passion. According to that knowledge, bodies differ from one another because of the development of different types of consciousness. Otherwise, there is no separate soul which manifests consciousness. The body is itself the soul, and there is no separate soul beyond the body. According to such knowledge, consciousness is temporary, or else there are no individual souls, but there is an all-pervading soul, which is full of knowledge, and this body is a manifestation of temporary ignorance. Or beyond this body, there is no special individual or supreme soul. All such conceptions are considered products of the mode of passion. So a very interesting verse, which we shall try to describe in a bit more detail. So this verse is describing different types of knowledge. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada talks about these different conceptions. And Prabhupada says all such conceptions are considered products of the modes of passion. So what are some of these different conceptions? That is what Prabhupada explains in the purport. So the first conception is, and we shall describe in detail a bit more of these, and in today's verse, I'll discuss maybe 3 of those which seem to be prominent in today's civilization. So the first conception is that the body is the soul. There's no difference between a soul and the body, they are one. The second conception is that the soul is different from the body, but the same size as the body. That there is difference, but they are of the same size. The third is that the soul is just momentary knowledge, meaning that certain exhibitions of knowledge is just momentary. The fourth one is that the soul is God, which is Prabhupada is talking about here. There's no individual souls. That all of us are God. The next one is that the soul is different from the body and it is conscious. So we have all of these different types of conceptions which differ from the Vedic understanding as given by the Lord in text number 20. So we shall describe a bit of that, but we know from the Bhagavad Gita what is the real understanding, and that the Lord gives in text number 18 in chapter 5. Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmane Gavi Astini Sunichaiva Swapakecha Pandita Samadharshinaha. The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog eater. And this verse is very clear, the understanding is very clear. There may be different species of life, elephant, dog, dog eater, Brahmana, cow. But the soul, or the source of consciousness in all of these different bodies is the same, is of the same nature. It's spiritual and it comes from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So that is knowledge in the mode of goodness. But knowledge in the mode of passion, a dog has a different soul, or even if it does have a soul. Elephant is an elephant soul. There's a dog eater soul. There's a Brahman soul. There's a cow soul. This is knowledge in the mode of passion. Interestingly enough, earlier today, I went to the website Christianity.com. Because many years ago, you know, we have these Jehovah's Witnesses people, not so much nowadays, but they knock on the door and they give you the Watchtower, their magazines, with all of the best intentions, sincere people, God-conscious people. So one day, one of these Jehovah's Witnesses people, they knocked, and I invited them in and struck up a conversation. And Prabhupada says, you know, when we speak to such people, we should focus on only one point. And that point is, why do you eat meat? The Bible and all other scriptures prohibit the eating of meat. And it's interesting when you strike up such conversations with those people, because they do not believe there's anything wrong with eating meat, because the animals they have a different type of consciousness. So this is what the Christianity religion currently says, and I'm taking it is that it's a representative of the religion because it's on Christianity.com. There it's written, as human beings, we do not inhabit this earth alone. We live with other creatures that were made by God for us to take care of. That's all very nice. Animals are one of the most important creatures by God, and that was entrusted to us. We even have pets that give us companionship, love, and joy. For example, dogs are considered man's best friend because it seems as though this type of animal knows what his human master is thinking. Dogs, like any animal, have a certain type of consciousness that is unique to other living things. And that is why we have a particular heart for them. However, despite their consciousness, they remain soulless, or they do not have spirits. For this reason, when they die, they do not enter into an afterlife. In other words, they will not live in eternity with us. The reason for this is because they are not created by the image and likeness of God. They do not have the body, soul, and spirit. And for this reason, they do not go to heaven or hell like us. So this is the predominant thinking in Christianity and to a large extent also in the Islamic faith. They see a difference. They see a difference between other living entities. That Krishna says, yeah, they see in every different body there is a different type of living entity. They see in the body of a cow, there's a different type of entity. In the body of an elephant, there's a different type of entity. In the body of a man, there's a different type of entity. And in the body of a cow, there's a different type of entity. And this Bhagavad Gita classifies as knowledge in the mode of passion, because this is not reality. According to Bhagavad Gita, the soul in the body of a dog is of the same nature as the soul in the body of a human being. The body of a dog is just like a dress. Sometimes we take out the old dress and we put a new dress. So the human body and the dog's body or other is simply a dress, but the soul is of the same intrinsic nature. And this is the special gift of the Vedic literature. And actually it has a special significance. Firstly, it's consistent that consciousness is a product of the soul. Prabhupada refers in the purport to a different type of understanding, and that is the scientific understanding. And what is the scientific understanding? Modern science. Where does consciousness come from? Many of us have studied science in school and we experience it. I'll go into a bit of a more technical explanation now because it's important we understand it. So, Rita Kumari Mataji, did you want to express something?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
I was just listening to you just now, and Dhanwan Pranam to you.
Dhanavad Pranam.
I wanted to say that you were just asked a question that how do we have the human body? Obviously, is the biology factor, isn't it? The multiplication of chromosomes, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
In the human body, you know, that's the way it is done. That's all. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I'm sure Rita Kumari, from our own personal discussion, from your own personal experience, you can see that the dog has a soul, it has feelings, it's very sentient.
Yes,
Yes.
the dog is very sincere, pet, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for that. So, yes, we can see the nature of animals. So let's just talk a bit more about the scientific understanding of where consciousness comes from, because it seems to be the prominent paradigm these days. Previously when we used to live in Rugby, I used to go to the University of Warwickshire and I used to give different classes to the students. And it always surprised me when I asked the question, what is the nature of consciousness and where does consciousness come from? The students had predominantly the modern scientific view about consciousness. So what is the modern scientific thought about consciousness? Firstly, the modern scientific view is that consciousness does not exist in the ethereal soul. And the modern theory is that this executive feeling of I, it is simply an illusion. And we overestimate the scope and power of our own consciousness because of the illusion of the I and the brain. And the modern scientific thought is that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon. And I'll explain this a bit more later. And ultimately, consciousness resides in the brain. And then they cite various evidence to say that why consciousness is a product of the brain. So they've got a few theories of that. And one theory they have is that through electrical stimulation, you can take some electrical pulses and you can put it in various parts of the brain, and you can manipulate a person's consciousness. You can make sure that they're hallucinating, that they're a certain different type of person or they're in a different place that is different from reality. So they play around with pulses and then they create these hallucinations, and they say, this is proof that if you manipulate the brain, you start to see different types of consciousness emerge. Then they say another proof is chemicals. If you give certain people certain types of drugs, which is essentially different types of chemicals, they start to think, feel, and see in a completely different way. And many of them perceive themselves to be different individuals. And then they cite the evidence of surgery. That how sometimes when you cut the brain in a certain way, you almost see like two types of consciousness emerging. So one is, they say you can manipulate consciousness by physical means. Therefore, it is a material phenomenon. Secondly, they say that when the psychological activity of the brain ceases, a person's consciousness goes out of existence. So what they do, they study the brain. And they see that only when the brain stops functioning, then only the person is declared to be dead. And lastly, some Swiss neuroscientists, they could manipulate the brain so people have so-called out-of-body experiences. I looked into that particular experiment. I did some added research, and I think the conclusions that they're drawing from that is completely wrong. But anyway, this is some of the evidence that they cite. And there's a Time magazine, which those days I used to receive Time magazine in 2007. And the essence of that article in Time magazine, that what we think to be consciousness is simply an emergent phenomenon out of the 100 million neurons that are firing in our brain and they create this illusion of consciousness. But when we talk about consciousness, what does that really mean? Like, for example, we can build a machine with a lens, and that lens can receive light. It can process that light through some different processing components, and then you can get a printout. I see a red light. Then you can change the light to green. That green waves, light waves, will go to the lens. It'll get processed, and this can print, I see a green light. So a machine can be easily built that responds to certain stimuli, and it gives a printout. But this does not explain the experience of seeing a red light. There's a huge difference between being conscious of and being conscious. This feeling that when we see a red light, it is a real life experience. This machine, it can print out, I see a red light, and it could be right. It sees it's processing a red light, but it is no experience of feeling a red light. Like when we see the sunshine, there's a whole human experience that comes with seeing the sunshine. So that is wrong. We can go into a really big explanation. I have an hour and a half's presentation on this, but I'm just going to summarize some of the problems with the material explanation. And one very, very common failing of, they say that every atom is naturally conscious. Consciousness doesn't have to come from a soul. Our body is ultimately made out of atoms, and every atom is just naturally conscious. So all that we do is we experience consciousness because each atom has consciousness. And as organisms become more complex, the more complex as the level of consciousness becomes, because more atoms. But there's a problem with that theory. And what is a problem with that theory? Is how do we explain the unity of consciousness? If each atom has got individual consciousness, we all know that we are not feeling millions of effects of consciousness. We have one unified experience of consciousness. So how do you explain the unity of consciousness? If every atom is separately conscious, then what mechanism integrates consciousness? That they cannot explain. They just cannot explain. And as I was explaining using MRI technology, how they can fiddle with consciousness, they can see consciousness in different parts of the brain. They can explain the easy part about the mental computation, but what they cannot explain, and they will never be able to explain, try as hard as they will. What is why is there a first-person subjective experience? Not only does a green thing look different from a red thing, remind us of other green things, but it actually looks green. From where does the subjective experience arise from? This science has never explained and can never explain, and they've been trying very hard. And coming back to the point they make, then when physiological activity of the brain ceases, a person's consciousness goes out of existence. Does it necessarily mean that leads to the conclusion that the brain is a source of consciousness? No. And a simple example is a man who's using a computer. Sometimes the computer hard drive may fail. Does that mean that this person has also failed or gone out of existence? No. So the logic itself is flawed. So if we examine in detail the modern scientific view about consciousness, we can see they have no real explanation. It's simply speculation. And the logic of their conclusion also fails. So, the only logical explanation is the explanation we see from the Vedic perspective. That consciousness is a non-mechanistic principle. And the Vedic paradigm, it conceives of consciousness at different levels. And consciousness is different from matter. But they may say, okay, we are doing our experiments and we are drawing our conclusions from real experiments. What is your proof that there is the soul? What experiment can you do that can prove that consciousness comes from the soul? And what is the Vedic answer? Would anyone like to explain that? If someone asks you that question, okay, you're saying about the soul and you just, but we can only believe something that we experience ourselves. Something we can conduct an experiment and we can see this theory ourselves. So does anyone know how would you answer if you get challenged like that? Anyone likes to say? Shall I tell you? Okay, there are a few devotees have unmuted themselves. Krishnavani and Kanta. Would you like to say?
It's the consciousness, isn't it? When you see the person is living or dead. So if there is no consciousness,
the bodies.
There's no consciousness, but they say the consciousness is a product of the brain, Mataji. But you're saying the soul. Have you seen the soul?
No, Prabhu, we don't see because the soul size is so tiny that with our material eyes we cannot see. But the consciousness, it comes from the heart, not from the brain. Because the soul lives in the region of the heart.
But sometimes we do an heart transplant. We take one heart out and we put another heart in. The person is still living. They pump the blood with a machine. Yeah. So how you can say the consciousness is from the heart then? Okay, I'm just playing devil's advocate. Anyone else likes to challenge me?
Krishna, probably. Is it my assumption is the consciousness is the soul. The soul is the consciousness.
You're saying the soul is the consciousness, but what is your proof for that?
Just research.
What research?
Watching videos on Raja Yoga.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. So we can answer them very easily. Yes, you can do an experiment and you can perceive the soul by your own experiment. And that is the process of yoga. By the process of yoga, one can personally perceive the soul and the super soul. And we all know that in the scientific world, if one scientist does an experiment in a certain way and he gets one result, and another scientist does the same experiment and he does the same result, then we know experiment can be replicated unlimited times and it yields the same result, then we know that's a universal truth, it's a universal law. So in the same way, any person can embark on yoga. And any person who follows the process of yoga as advocated can realize the same result in perceiving the soul. So isn't that a valid form of verification? That this consciousness is a product of the soul and it's not an immaterial emergent phenomenon. So these are just some thoughts. I want to conclude from some pastimes from the Vedic literature, which demonstrate this point that the Lord speaks about in the Bhagavad Gita. We know the story and the pastime of Bharat Maharaj. He was in a human body, and because he thought of a deer, he took the body of a deer. By the grace of the Lord, he was still able to remember his humanly existence. And then next life, he took the life of Jad Bharat. We know the story of King Nirga, who the Lord was playing with these coward boys, they found a lizard in a well. And how, by the mercy of the Lord, the lizard was able to recount how in his previous life he was a demigod who had unfortunately given in charity, but one of the cows he had given to one Brahmana went to the other Brahmana and he got cursed. We know the story of Nalakuvar and Manigriva, who were living entities who had to take birth as trees. So the Vedic, what we take for granted because of the knowledge we get, other people have no conception of the nature of the soul and how the soul is individual and how the body of different living entities, they are not different souls. We don't get an animal soul or a human soul. So these are just some quick thoughts. I know I probably raced through, especially the scientific bit. If you lost me, forgive me. But these are just some thoughts. And what really comes out very clear through these discussions is how fortunate we are to connect with the Vedic knowledge and how perfect this knowledge is and how this knowledge gives us the most sensible and coherent and logical explanation of the existence of consciousness, not only in the human body, but in other bodies also. And it gives us a very inclusive understanding of the position of other living entities also. So I'll stop here. I'll see if anyone's got any questions or comments. Does that make sense, what was discussed today? Could you all relate to what was being said or discussed?
Yes, Prabhuji, we understood. Just the
Yeah.
scientific bit became a bit complex.
Yeah, I understood.
Yeah, it was good session.
Yeah, I summarized it, you know, when I do these presentations in the university, because we're talking to a scientific audience, we got to talk from their perspective. You know, there was one wonderful pastimes of Srila Prabhupada. Once he was going on an airplane, and next to him was sat one of his disciples, Madhavisha. So Prabhupada, in the middle of the flight, he said, Madhavisha, I want you to be the Mayavadi and I will be the Vaishnava. So, and we're going to fight. Let's fight. So Prabhupada took the position of the Vaishnav, and Madhavisha took the point of the Mayavadi. And there were different arguments, and as we can expect, Prabhupada defeated. And Prabhupada said, okay, now you be the Vaishnav and I'll be the Mayavadi. And then as the Mayavadi, Prabhupada defeated Madhavisha. And Prabhupada said, this is Vaishnava. We must know their arguments so well that we'll be able to defeat them in any challenge. So as part of the Krishna consciousness movement, all of us are preachers. Our family business is preaching. Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschacha Deshatarine. The philosophy of voidism, impersonalism, and Prabhupada says, my mission in this life was to defeat the scientists and the Mayavadis. So we are followers of Srila Prabhupada. We must know the argument so well that we should be able to defeat it and uphold Srila Prabhupada's name. Because if we have some argument and they start to convince us from their arguments that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon, they can take it, oh, we defeated Bhaktivedanta Swami's follower. And we should never, ever, ever let that happen for the sake of Srila Prabhupada. So therefore, I spent a little time, on that point today, covering at least some of the high-level arguments. But we should defeat it. We should defeat it because this modern scientific theories, they're just fooling people. They're bluffing people, and people are unfortunately using the opportunity for the human form of life. Okay, Dev Kishan, I saw you unmuted yourself at one point. Did you want to add anything?
Basically, sorry, Hare Krishna Prabhu. I was wondering if you could give like an overview of just the scientific explanation.
Yeah, it takes some time, but they are different. Essentially, the scientific explanation is that there is no soul, right? And consciousness is an emergent phenomenon. So consciousness is a product of some material interaction, or consciousness is just inherent in the atom. That matter is just inherently conscious. So, I've just explained the arguments against the point that matter is inherently conscious, because the smallest form of matter is the atom. And if atoms are individually conscious, how do you explain it? Unified conscious? Through what mechanism? And there's no explanation. So that argument or that explanation falls apart. Then there's other explanations of consciousness, like panpsychism, interactionalism, and so on. But basically, those philosophies, they are trying to explain it from a material point of view. And I'll share with you some slide presentations I have. You can go through it. I've summarized it there, but it may be a bit lengthy for today's discussion. Hope that helps.
No, that's perfect. I think I'll look over the slides as well. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Anyone else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
So I'm just wondering how this thing about dog being the best friend of man and then him not having soul or consciousness, how does that how do we comprehend that, or how do people comprehend that? And on the one hand, they're saying that good dog is the best friend, so that there is intelligence, there is everything that one can think of in terms of that animal being as almost as intelligent as a man, and then you're assuming that it doesn't have a soul and it doesn't have any consciousness.
No, they say it has consciousness, but that consciousness is of a different type, and it's also temporary. It's
And that
like,
means inferior? Does that mean inferior?
oh yeah, definitely inferior, definitely inferior. The dog was put on earth for our pleasure,
Yeah.
and there's no afterlife for a dog. There's only afterlife for a human being. And if you go on their website, Christianity.com, they try to give various explanations to support their view. But if you look at it, if you scrutinize it, you'll see that it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
And I
because,
suppose, yeah, sorry, go on.
yeah, how would they explain the consciousness of the dog then? Where does it come from?
Yes.
You know, how the dog is almost equally sentient as a human being. You know, the explanation of animal consciousness is not sound. It's not sound.
But that's your justification of if they are inferior to humans, then you can justify eating them, isn't it?
Yes.
That's their justification.
Yes. That, you know, that these animals were put on earth, you know, for our pleasure,
Yeah.
our enjoyment. That is their philosophy.
So then why would Jesus say, thou shalt not kill?
Yes, that's exactly the question that Srila Prabhupada, whenever he spoke to Christians, you know, the commandment is that thou shalt not kill. And they say, well, killing applies only for human beings. The Prabhupada should said, Jesus would have said, thou shalt not murder.
That's right.
You know? So if you listen to Srila Prabhupada's conversations with different types of Christians, there's some interesting exchanges there. Yeah, therefore Krishna says this is knowledge in the mode of passion. It is impure knowledge. Any knowledge that's tainted by the modes, it's impure. It's not pure knowledge.
Yes. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Krishna.
Also, you know, like their understanding is some, you know, like dogs are okay, they're like friends and they don't need dogs, but then other animals, because they are lower, they have lower consciousness, so they are for them to eat. You know, God has created them so they can eat animals. That's their argument.
Yes, yes, like sheep and cows and goats, you know?
Yeah.
They were just created by God for them to eat.
Yeah, my driver also, you know, he argues that, okay, if we don't eat, you know, all these birds and that there'll be so much population, so there'll be more than humans. I said, no, that's, you know, because they want to eat, you know, meat. So they just argue like that. I said, no, you know, like everybody, you know, like there is a control, you know, it's not that because you eating there, that's why their birds population and animals population are controlled. Because you are breeding them for your own food, because that's not all natural, because you are, you know, like, you know, unnaturally breeding them for your pleasure.
Yeah.
Then he won't say anything.
Yeah, this whole philosophy that these other living entities are made for our pleasure. There's this, you know, this it comes to the root problem in the Vaishnava philosophy, that thinking that we are the controllers. You know, we are not the controllers. These are all children of Krishna, they're children of God. And they are not there for our exploitation. So there's a comment here from, sorry, yes, Mataji, go on.
Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Mamevan se jiva loki, because everybody is part and parcel of the God. So
Yeah.
you know, like they are part of God and we don't have any rights to kill them.
Yes.
Eat them. So the other thing, you know, Prabhu, you were asked explaining that in Bhagavad Gita it says Sarvasya Chaham Riddhi Sannivishwam, means super soul is residing in the living entity's heart or in the region of the heart. And then you were saying that, when they're doing the heart transplant, so can you explain what happens to the soul and super soul when they are doing that surgery?
Yeah, it said in the region of heart, it doesn't mean in the heart. It could be that, temporarily by the facilitation and the sanction of the Lord, the heart can be swapped and then the soul can move into another heart. The soul is not dependent ultimately on the physical condition. It's just like some people have out-of-body experiences.
Yeah.
They leave the body and then they come back. So in the same way, during a transplant, that can happen.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's some comments here. Goethe makes a wonderful comment that all cells of the body are changing, but the consciousness stays the same. Yes, good point, Goethe. We know it's I think every 7 years, every single cell in the body completely changes. So every 7 years, we get a completely new body. But none of us perceive ourselves as different. We perceive ourselves as the same. So if every 7 years, every single cell has changed, but we're perceiving ourselves as the same, that goes to prove that we are not, there's something different from matter. There's something different from the cell, and that's the soul. Nice point, Goethe. Santosh Mataji makes the point, Hare Krishna. Why was Bharat Maharaj born as a deer in his next life? He tried to help the deer out of his goodness. So was he penalized to be born as a deer? Thank you. So Krishna says in the Gita that whatever state of consciousness one has at the time of death, to that state we will attain. Meaning that Jad Bharat had such intimate association with the deer that in one sense he took on the consciousness of the deer. His thought was completely absorbed in the deer. And if one is so absorbed in the deer, one likes the deer so much, why should we get a human form of life? Human form of life has a very specific purpose. If we just want to be happy in the association of deers, then get another body of a deer and you can have better association with the deer because you'll have a similar body. So Krishna facilitates the body according to the desire. Why get a body that's really not fully aligned? If you're in a human's body and you like the association of the deer so much, you can have a better level of association if you are also a deer. So that's the principle. Krishna is ultimately fulfilling the desire and giving us a body that's more suitable for the desire. I hope that answers your question, Santosh Mataji. Okay, it's already 10:02, so we've gone over time. If there's no other comments, no other questions, thank you very much for your association and for your questions and attendance. Vancha kalpa turubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Shri Prabhupada ki
Krishna
jai.
Prabhuji,
Namaste
thank
Thank you,
you.
Prabhupada.
Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna
Krishna,
Prabhu.
Hare